forward beginning in 2011. And here's what I would propose. If you were indicted beginning in 2011 for violating the state ethics law, or if you're indicted for violating a federal corruption statute, in other words, if you're indicted for a misuse of your position, upon indictment, you were suspended from office. Now, that jars some people when they hear it, but I want you to think about this. If any one of you went back to work right now, and you were served with an indictment that accused you of stealing money from your company, or misusing your position at your company, there is not a person in this room who would not be placed on administrative leave immediately, and you wouldn't be able to go to work. You would immediately have to turn your keys in your car and all your access over, and you would be put on leave until your situation cleared up. There's not one of you in this room that would not be held to that standard. Why should we take politicians and elected officials and hold them to a different standard than the people who are living in this state? Now, first time I put that idea out, somebody said to me, now Davis, do you know what you would do? You would empower DAs and U.S. attorneys and prosecutors to just go out there and say, heck, all I have to do is indict somebody and I can overturn an election result. Here's how I would answer that. Right now, if a prosecutor brings a case that turns out to not have a foundation or a basis, it is near impossible for the defendant to sue the government. In the interest of fairness, to make sure that prosecutors were never tempted to use an indictment simply as a tool to remove someone from office under the laws I would propose, I would give the defendant, if he was found not guilty or the charges were dismissed, I would give that individual not only reinstatement to his position, obviously, but also the opportunity to go into court and to sue the government if a jury believed that a reasonable prosecutor would not have brought that case, and if a defendant could show that a prosecutor knowingly disregarded exculpatory evidence and knowingly brought a case that had no basis, that prosecutor would be personally liable. I think that's only fair if we're going to make an indictment something that would trigger a political event. All of these things added together would be the strongest set of ethics proposals, forget ever passed, ever even contemplated in the great state of Alabama. Not everyone would like it. The people who dominate politics through the old-fashioned ways of financing campaigns would be inconvenienced. People who use their office as a ticket of privilege and access might decide that politics was less appealing to them. People who are used to influencing power and government behind the scenes with no accountability might be threatened. People who intend to be corrupt and to misuse their offices and who believe an indictment is only a bad news story, and if you can stretch out the trial long enough, you can find one juror who will let you go and nothing happens, they might be threatened. What I would say to everybody who fits the definition that I just described, good riddance. Because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last comment I will make to you before I take your questions. The only good reason to go into politics, the only good reason to be around the political process is to try to achieve a common good for your community. Politics is not for people who can't find a job doing anything else. And politicians ought to be held to a high standard. When you vote for someone, you give them a title, you give them the power to speak for you, you give them the power to lead, you give them the power to shape an agenda. That is an enormous gift from the people. At a minimum, that gift ought to require some responsibility and some obligation to whom much is given, much is expected. That is an ethic that ought to drive every single aspect of our lives. And ultimately, I don't don't care what your politics are. There are probably more Democrats in this room than when I come here to speak to Rowley. But irrespective of your politics, every single individual in this room has a stake in public purpose. You have a stake in government being able to produce good, fair, non-self-interested outcomes. All of you have an issue that you care about where you need government to do the right thing and the same thing and the decent thing. All of you have an expectation that the political process will be one where what people do behind the scenes can survive the scrutiny of the light of day. All of you have an expectation that politics can be noble. So many of us have been inspired this last several years by politics. I was watching a tape before I came over here. Former President Clinton speaking at the Democratic Convention last year. And I watched them cut away to Michelle Obama, to now Secretary of State Clinton, to a beautiful young woman named Chelsea Clinton, and to many other delegates on the floor of that convention who believed while they were in Denver for those few days that American politics had reached a place that they never thought could be. I was in Washington on January 20th on a brutally cold day. You know, you don't know until you sometimes get to watch this stuff. I always believed that the seats were heated for members of Congress. But you know what made the cold bearable? Looking out and seeing 1.7 million of my fellow Americans stretched out in an endless canvas from the Capitol to the Lincoln Memorial, and thinking that 46 years ago, a preacher from Georgia spent some time in Alabama, stood on the other side of the Lincoln Memorial, and that preacher spoke to the masses facing the Capitol and said, "Will you join me in beseeching power to do that which is right?" And now, this new president stood facing that crowd with the Capitol behind him, saying that a generation of history has heard your prayers. A generation of change is now willing to make this country truer to the notion that we can be a more perfect union. I do believe in politics. I believe it can be made to work. I believe it can produce a common good. But only if we have rules and standards and ethics. Unethical politics not only damages everyone in this room, but it damages the ideal of public purpose. It diminishes the clarity of a public agenda. So I'm going to be talking about this stuff between now and June of 2010, and between now and November of 2010. And then I'm going to be talking about it afterwards, because the next governor of this state has got to challenge us, ladies and gentlemen. We know what happens when we're not challenged. We lag. We think that moving from 47 to 42 is progress. And we content ourselves, and the excuse is, well, what do you expect? We're only a poor state. When we challenge, or when our governor challenges us, it will move us to a place, ladies and gentlemen, that we have not known. Not at some distant point called someday. They love to talk about someday. They love to say later, but not now. I happen to believe that our goals for this state can be achieved right now, in our time, in our season, with the right leadership.